Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Now, I have here a very, very special guest. His stories are entertaining as hell. His name is Matt Cox, but as you'll learn through this story, he's got about 15 other names that he's went by through some of his escapades in his life. Please welcome to the show, Matt Cox. How are you, my friend?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Look, I've heard your story, a while back. I think it was first on the Concrete podcast, and then I've
Yeah.
listened to a lot of other ones that you've done. And there's, I can't remember the name of. There's a name for people that just tell stories the way you do, and you are that guy. Like you captivate, and I'm sitting there listening, and 2.5 hours rolls by, and it feels like 30 minutes. And not everybody can pull that off, but you can. Tell our audience a little bit, kind of about who you are, and then what kind of led you into. Was it basically just mortgage fraud? Is that what you were ultimately charged with? I know it was a very high dollar amount, even though you say that that dollar amount wasn't necessarily reflected in what you got.
Yeah, they hit me with like they were talking about $40 million for my mortgage company, which I got them to drop, and $15 million. I ended up getting stuck with $15 million
Wow.
um of fraud, personally myself, which is what I pled guilty to. And then I still owe like well, I owe less than 6 million now, but I was stuck with 6 million in restitution. And yeah, so I owned a mortgage company. Yeah, that's basically what happened was, I kind of stumbled into just owning a mortgage company. I didn't even really want to start a mortgage company. I mean, I just needed to do something to make some money, and the things that I was good at were all basically sales related.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up dating a girl who started working at a mortgage company, and she said, you've got to do this. So I went to the test, passed the test, became a broker, worked for the company, and did really, really well right away. Now I'm sure you've heard this that, but the thing is that my very first loan had bank fraud
Yeah,
in it,
you start off the gate like it's fraud related. So yeah, kind of. And I want. Have you ever spoken to that lady since then?
Gretchen Zayas. No, I've never spoken to her.
I was curious about that. I was like, I wonder if she knows what she kind of set in motion there by doing
Oh,
that.
I'm sure she knows. I'm sure listen,
Yeah.
how many people everybody's seen the podcast. Like so you can imagine, how small the mortgage industry is. Like if I show up at a mortgage convention, like everybody knows.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. So because it's just not a huge industry. And of course, people pass it around right away. If one or two people, if you're in the mortgage industry and you hear my story, you're like, holy Jesus. You
Yeah.
immediately shoot it out to 10 of your buddies who are in the industry.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they're sending it to 10. Next thing it's wildfire. I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, she knows, not because she's in the mortgage industry, but because there are people that know her, um, that are out and have told me that, she knows, her husband knows. And
So
she's
she
also the same person that set me up, by the way.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I never make that connection. I never really, focus on her being that person, but it started off where she was my manager, and I had a loan that had a 30-day late on it. The woman, my borrower, had been late on her mortgage or her rent had been 30 days late on her rent within the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a form that said it was late that had been filled out by her property management company. And Gretchen told me to white out the 30-day late and send it in. So I did. I was concerned about it, but I was also behind on my truck payment. I was behind on everything. I mean, I was going under. And I had banked on, I put everything on becoming a mortgage broker. I mean, I went to the classes. With money I didn't have, I flew out and was trained. You're not paid to be trained, so there was all these things I had done. So this loan like had to close.
Yeah.
And she said it'd be okay. And it was okay. It closed right away. I got checked like $3,500 or something like that.
Wow.
And that was a huge amount of money at that time. So, a week or two later, I had something else happen where the next loan had an issue. I fixed that issue too. That loan closed, and then the next one, and then the next one. And before I knew it, I was like the highest closing broker in the office. And the next month I was closed even more. It was like 4 loans went to 6, and then it was 8, and then it was 10, and then it was 12. And then they made me a manager. And then the Department of Banking and Finance like closed the offices down. And I temporarily went to work for somebody else for a few months, and until I could open up my own place. And I opened up my own place and hired a bunch of mortgage brokers.
Now, were these guys doing what you were doing?
Oh yeah, they were all right. Like right away, if you see somebody, you see me closing loans left and right, and you're having problems, they're like, "Man, I don't know what to do." I'm like, "Well, I'd fix this," and they're like, "Well, wow, that's fraud." And I'd be like, "Well, don't close it then. Like, you can give it to me. I'll give you $500 for it." And they're like, "Well, no, I don't want $500. I'm supposed to make $4,000." Well, I know, but you can't make $4,000 because you won't do what has to be done.
Yeah.
I will. So I'll give you $500. No, 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 no. What should I do? Okay, change this, change that, send it in.
What you told, I can't remember whose show it was on, but you told a story and it was a joke about a guy just saying, "Oh, God's got me," or something like that. You remember that joke you said?
God's got me.
Yeah, it was like the guy was trying to get out of his house. There was a flood. He was like, "Oh, God's got me. God's got me. God's got
Oh
me."
no, no, no. I know. I was closing a loan one time for an investor, and I went to go close a loan. And just before the closing, like he owned a house. He had fixed up a house. He was selling it to this woman, and he had no idea what I was doing to get the loan closed. So just before the loan is supposed to close, he called the title company and complained about the fees. And they said, "Well, she's closing with a subprime lender." And he was like, "Why is she closing with a subprime lender? She has a good job at working at like Walmart." And they were like, "Walmart? She doesn't work at Walmart. She's self-employed." And he's like, "No, she works at Walmart." And so they were like, "Oh, wait a second, something's wrong." They end up making some phone calls. They say, "Oh, we're not going to close this loan." So he comes to me and I said, "Look, I can take the loan. I can send it to another lender. We can close it with another title company." And he says, "Matt," he said, I'm a religious person." And I knew he was. He'd already mentioned it half a dozen times. Um, and he was like, "I'm a religious person, and I don't know that I feel comfortable knowing I know what you're gonna do to close this loan now." I went, "Okay." And he said, "Isn't there some way we can do this without you having to commit fraud?" And I was like, "Yeah, you can get another buyer because this woman ain't closing."
Yeah.
"Oh, but she's a good woman." And I said, "Listen, listen, 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 enough with all that." I said, "Okay." I said, "Listen," I said, "she's such a good woman. Then stop standing in the way, stop bitching about the fees, and let her close, let her close. You want to help her. You want to do the right thing." I said, "Listen, let me explain something." I said, there was once a man," I said, "and he was in this town, and it was raining, and there was a flood, and it was the whole town's filling up with water. And this, the National Guard comes by, and like they're driving through in a Jeep, and they say, 'Listen, get in the Jeep. This whole town's flooding. You're going to drown. You're going to die.'" And he goes, "No, no, no, God's going to save me." And then I said, so the water they drive off and leave him. The water keeps rising. And then it's all the way up to his neck, and he's really scared. And a boat comes by, and the boat says, "Jump in the boat. You're going to drown if you stay here." He says, "No, no, God's going to save me." I said, so then he climbs up on the roof of the local church, and the water keeps rising, rising, and a helicopter comes, and they lower a basket, and they go, "Get in the basket." And he says, "No, no, I don't need the basket. God's going to save me." And they fly off, and then eventually the water keeps rising up, and he drowns. And I go, when he gets up to heaven, he says, "God, I drowned. You know, I thought you were going to come save me. I'm a good Christian. I thought you were going to save me." And God said, "Well, I sent a Jeep, a boat, and a helicopter. What did you want me to do?" And so I looked at the guy and I said, "I'm your Jeep, your boat, and your helicopter." I said, "Do you want to close the fucking loan or not?" And he was like, "Okay, okay." And then he left, of course. And we closed like, a week later because the loan was already, done. So I went to another lender and we closed the loan, and, he got his 30 grand or something, and I got a nice broker fee, and this woman got into her house. And
So
whether she paid or not, I don't know. I'm sure she paid for 6 months or a year. Maybe she's still there today. I don't know.
and see, that was the key to a lot of what these fraudulent mortgages you were doing was like you did have to make payments for a while, right? That's kind of the key because if you default on the first payment, doesn't that create some problems?
Yeah, that's a real problem. But this is a real like it's much different if it's a real person, right?
Right.
Like this was a real woman who bought the house.
Yeah.
So, if she makes 6 months payment or a year payment, I mean, they're never going to figure out it's fraud.
Yeah.
They end up, she stops paying, and the whatever lender it ends up with, they start the foreclosure process and they start foreclosing on her. It got to be a problem where I was like, I'm not concerned because after 6 months from now, there's no chance that the FBI is going to come in and say, hey, you did this. And okay, first of all, it's 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
And all the documents was given by this woman, where she says that she didn't give them to you. You made them. Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you, bro. That's not what happened. And I didn't end up with a house, and she has a huge benefit for the house, and I got a small broker fee. Like, I don't know what to tell you. They're not going to do anything. There's just nothing for them to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and is she going to admit that she's committed fraud,
Yeah.
or that she knew about the fraud? And what really happens? What benefit is it for the lender to really report at that point? You're not getting your money back.
Yeah.
So, what happened was I opened those mortgage companies, and I kept closing loans, and eventually I did get caught. The FBI actually indicted the girl, Gretchen, who was my manager. I opened my own place, and she worked for me for about 6 months to a year. And then she started her own place. And then I started running loans through her mortgage company. And eventually my mortgages were fine. Because if I buy a house and I fix it up and I go to sell it, like, I own the company. I can't do the mortgage.
Right.
Because it's not an arm's length transaction. And then of course I was selling a lot of these properties I was selling to my wife at the time in her maiden name. So what would happen is now I definitely can't do it.
Yeah.
So I would go to her and I'd send her a package, let her close it, give her $500. I'm doing the whole thing. It's just closing in your name. It closes and it's a done deal. So, what ended up happening was she and her husband ran like a straw man scam, right? Like they were working with another company where these guys were buying houses, pulling out money, making a payment or two, and letting them go into foreclosure. Well, these guys did that, and eventually that caught up with them, and Gretchen and Pete got indicted. When they got indicted, they came to me and asked me to refinance their house for get them $75,000 to pay their attorney. So I do that. And then maybe a week or two later, they call me up and say, can you come meet us for lunch? And I go, sure. And I go out and I meet them for lunch. And in the middle of lunch, they say, look, the FBI is asking questions about you. And I went, what? They were like, yeah, they're asking questions. Like, they came in, they raided our office, and they took all of our files, and they've been going through our files, and they found yours. And I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't heard anything about that. And I was like, when did this happen? They were like, yeah, like a month or two ago. I was like, I didn't know that. They were like, yeah, that's why we needed a lawyer. And of course, none of that happened.
Yeah.
But they said that, and I was like, oh my God. I said, well, you haven't told them anything. You didn't tell them that I made the W-2s, did you? You didn't tell them that the pay stubs are fake. You didn't tell them that we got, I just buried myself. Like, I just blabber on and on. And like, as I'm blabbering, I realize that they're wired.
Yeah.
So,
I
stand
the boyfriend or the husband or something jumped up. You said something about the FBI, and he jumped up.
Yeah, he stood up. Well, what happened was, as I was talking, I kind of said, look, here's what you need to tell them. And I start coming up with a story. Like, you never met my wife, and she's like, whoa, she goes, we can't lie to the FBI. And I went, can't lie to the FBI? What are you talking about? I said, you've been lying to the FBI the whole time. I said, I just refinanced your house for $75,000. You gave me fake W-2s and pay stubs. And her husband stands up and he goes, we never lied to the FBI. We may not have told them everything, but we didn't lie. And I just remember thinking, like, why would he say that? You know, like I was like, well, like I know you've been committing fraud. I know you're lying. I know you've been lying. I know you're constantly, you know, so it's like, who are you saying? Like, you're not saying that for my benefit. I know the truth. And I kind of looked at him and I thought, oh wow. Like,
You had that what I call the George Young moment. If you ever seen that movie Blow at the end when he's
yeah, of
trying to
course.
make that last deal and he comes back from the bathroom and he's looking for his knife and he's like, "Where's my fucking knife?" And then it just kind of all comes together and he's like, just sits back. It's like he realizes what happened.
Yeah.
So they were all
Well,
wired
what,
up. Everybody was listening and everything.
yeah. And
Wow.
what ends up happening is I tell her to just have the FBI agent call me and I leave, you know, and he calls me like 20 minutes later. I mean, they didn't even pretend like they weren't wired. You know, he's just, they're like, okay, look, when do you, you know, I need to talk to you. When do you want to come down? I was like, oh, okay, I'll come down on Monday. This was like a Thursday or something. And we schedule an appointment and I end up that weekend, I find a lawyer and my lawyer says, well, you're not going to talk to him. So uh, he starts negotiating. I give him like 75 grand and apparently is a going rate to plead guilty.
I was about to say
Uh,
that's a lot
for
to go in and plead
to plead,
guilty.
yeah, I'm not saying let's go to trial. I'm saying I just need to plead guilty and get this over. First of all, there was no money that was lost. Like what they knew of, there was no money that was lost.
Yeah,
These are just loans that have fraud in them. And they know that. And so they're like, okay, he pleads. Well, first they argue. They want to say there's $500,000 in loss. And it's like, yeah, you're never going to find, there's no loss.
yeah,
They're like, well, there's potential loss. No, there's no potential loss. So the potential loss would be it's a thing that they come up with where it's like if you lend money and you could have lost it,
yeah.
they used to be able to charge you with it if you could have lost it,
You could have
like
lost.
you didn't, right? But you can't charge me with that if they couldn't charge me with potential loss if what they lent me money on exceeded the amount of money they lent me. So if you're lending me $80,000 on a house that's valued at $100,000, then there's
Can't
no
lose money.
potential loss there.
Yeah,
And what's so funny is, you know, they tried to say, well, the properties are overvalued. And I was like, based on what? And they were like, well, you know, based on our confidential informants. And I was like, no, I was like, the lenders that lent the money did their own appraisals. They agree. Like you're not gonna, I don't know where you're gonna figure how you're gonna prove that.
yeah.
So,
But did you guys
you
have
know, so
appraisers in your pockets to help do that?
yeah, but they don't realize like that. Like, what are you going to do? You want me to plead guilty, or you want to keep trying to get me for, you know, $500,000 and I end up getting a year in prison, or you want to give me 3 years probation and this whole thing's done?
Yeah,
Like, and the truth is, I'm going to argue the whole time. And
yeah,
how do you really prove what that property is really worth?
yeah.
It's difficult.
Well, I asked that because there was a little skit on Sopranos where they did something similar to that. They went and bought up like a bunch of like houses in a shitty neighborhood that was real run down. Then they got an appraiser to go appraise them for about 3 times what they were worth. Of course, the appraiser was in on the deal. Then they went to HUD, and HUD offered to buy those houses to fix them up for like, low income families, things like that. Well, then obviously they go into foreclosure and everybody splits up the benefits from the appraisals up on the house. So that was kind of their scam, and there that they run for like a couple episodes in like the third season. So that's why I was curious on
Right.
that.
But I mean, you know, it's the Sopranos. I mean,
Yeah. Well, but things like that
it
really go on,
sounds
right? Or
good.
something similar.
Similar things like that go on, but it's much more complicated than you
Right.
just get an appraiser to say.
Yeah.
Like the appraiser has to justify it, and the lenders are going to check the appraisal. They're going to send
Yeah.
their own appraiser out. They're going to, like, it's very complicated to fake an appraisal. You can massage it.
Yeah.
Like if a guy comes in and says a house is worth 300,000, and let's say there's a roof leak, you know, and because of the roof leak, like the house will never pass the appraisal. Like he's going to have to say that, well, if he ends up doesn't say it, now we've got a loan. So, I mean, is that like, yeah, that's easy, but he can't say it's worth 300,000 if everything in the neighborhood is selling for 100,000.
Right. Yeah, I got you.
So, you know, he can overlook things. He can even adjust, he can even, you know, massage it a little bit, but he's not going to be able to just come up with a 3 times that amount of money.
So
Or,
ultimately, on that first pinch, what did you deal with? Because you cut a lot of deals. I think you done something to where they didn't Was it your wife at the time? They didn't arrest your wife for some of the
Yeah,
property
yeah. I
in your
pled
name?
guilty. I said I'll plead guilty to uh to it was wire fraud. I pled guilty to one count of wire fraud. Um, as long as they didn't indict my wife, because the truth is my wife was the one that she had done all the loans. Like she'd signed everything, like everything's in her name. Like I'm not really that much in trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I could have been like, oh, look, I don't know what she gave me. I don't know. Um, but everything is in her name. So I said, I'll plead guilty to it. And you just drop the charges on her. So they did. And she and I ended up getting a divorce. During this process, we get a divorce. I can't run the mortgage company anymore. So I decide I'm going to start doing like really starting to commit fraud.
Because then
And
I think it's fair to say, we'll interject this real quick. You do have a degree in fine arts, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
you have the ability to do a lot of this forgery and fake documents, fake paperwork, and all that kind of stuff because that's in your background.
right. Yeah, I was able to make fake W-2s, fake pay stubs, bank websites, um, you know, bank statements, fake social security cards, fake driver's licenses, fake birth certificates, fake social security award letters. Um, yeah, so that kind of
Wow.
stuff. So,
So this
I
is
was
where it
making,
really ramps up.
yeah, I was making canceled checks, right? So if you're buying your house, or let's say you rent a place,
Yeah.
or let's say you're renting a place right now, and maybe it's you and your girlfriend, but I need to prove that you've been the one paying the rent, and you can't prove that. So what I do is I would make like 24 months worth of canceled checks showing that you were the one paying it, and that $1,800 a month was coming out of your bank statements. And here are copies of the front and the back of each canceled check. And they could check, if they wanted to call the bank, they could call the bank because I was also the bank. And if they wanted to check online to look at the banking website, they could do that. They wanted to see the bank statements, I can give them to you. You want to call the bank, everything. So across the board, they were done.
Yeah.
So you're getting a loan. And so
This is crazy. I mean, it's a lot of work. It seems like it's a lot of T's to cross, I's to dot, but like obviously you had it wired at that point. You knew everything that somebody was going to look for. Because I'd heard you say in a bunch of different interviews, there's only so much certain people are going to look into, and then that's it. Because of the
yeah,
volume of stuff they have coming in.
yeah, they've got it's a ton of documents. Are you telling me that you're going to let's say the documents, let's say you've got your canceled check, and for each canceled check on your bank statement that I also provided, I've got it highlighted.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to go through and calculate to make sure that every single negative and positive deposit and withdrawal out of that account, that every single number, like if you're off, they're not checking. They've got an original bank statement for a bank that they can call and verify, and they have canceled checks front and back, copies of canceled checks front and back. Like, how much more? This is what they see. They see 50 of these a day. Mine look identical. Why would they suddenly say this is the one we're going to really look into? But
Yeah.
this is the thing about it, is like, look into it. Start calling. Call. Somebody's going to answer that phone. Somebody's going to sit here and go, hold on a second. Okay, now what is the account number? All right, hold on. All right, let me put you on hold. Okay, yeah, I've got the account up, and they're gonna go through the whole thing, and the underwriter's gonna be like, damn, yeah, it's real. The fact that the bank isn't real doesn't even enter their mind. Who the fuck gonna come? Who's gonna make a bank? Who's gonna make a website for a bank, including the entire bank website and all the canceled checks and all the pages? And I mean, once you've done that, it seems like a lot of work to get one loan, but once you've done it, it's good over and over and over again.
Wow.
And they never do. Like, they almost never
What'd
call.
you name the bank?
I had Bank of Ybor, and I had Southern Exchange Bank of Clarksville.
Wow. This is
It's
crazy,
horrible.
man. Yeah, but like,
So
and two, you got caught. Like the lenders caught on to you a few times. Not caught as in a sense with the authorities and being arrested, but a lot of people figured out what you were doing, and it's almost like you were able to cut deals and get out of that because I think one of the things you said that made perfect sense. Nobody really wants to call and report this because then if you call and report it, the FBI is then going to look at them as well as you. So it puts
yeah,
everybody
they're
up
looking
under a
through.
microscope.
Yeah, they're looking through your files. They're checking. They're coming in your office. Nobody who wants that. Who
Yeah.
wants two agents coming in saying we need copies of this, copies of that, copies of like, hey, 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 look, this is a lender who's making a lot of money. They don't want. I don't. You don't want anybody looking through your file. It doesn't matter if you say no, no, everything we're doing is legitimate. It doesn't matter. It's disruptive.
Yeah.
That's assuming it's. That's assuming that everything is legitimate. Listen, most of these lenders knew there was funky stuff going on. Unless it was blatant, they just want to be able to sell the paper.
Yeah.
They want to be able to get rid of these loans. They want to be able to close them, get their fees, and put them in a bundle of a million other mortgages and sell them. They
Yeah.
don't want problems. So, as long as you're not blatant, you're going to get away with it.
What's one of the times you got like they I guess figured out what you were doing and called you and like originally they were saying they were going to report you and then you basically cut a deal and gave them what was like part of their money back or something? I
No,
know this
I
happened a
think
couple different times,
this
but
happened a bunch of times, man.
yeah.
Like what happened was I started making fake people, right? So once I was on probation, I started making synthetic identities.
Yeah.
And so I was able to get Social Security to issue Social Security numbers to people that didn't exist, right? So I would make a fake shot record and a fake birth certificate for a kid that was like 10 months old. I go into Social Security and I say, look, my son was born, with a midwife at home. He wasn't born in the hospital. His name is James Red. And I need a Social Security number issued. And they check the system and come back. They go, you're right. He doesn't have a Social Security number. So they would issue one. Like 10 days later, I'd get in the mail, and then I'd take that Social Security number and I'd start applying for credit cards. That would create a credit profile. And then once the profile was created in the credit bureaus, I would then get secured credit cards in his name, which would also help support that credit profile. And I made the payments, and then after like 6 months, he'd have credit scores of like 700 plus credit scores. So now I've got a guy that doesn't exist that has perfect credit. I can provide him a job, a bank, canceled check showing he's paid rent somewhere, and I can give him his down payment. So he would buy I started having these guys buy houses. So I named one guy, his name like Lee Black. One guy was David Silver. I had a guy named James Red. I had a guy named William Blue. I had a guy named Brandon Green.
So a lot of
Michael White.
colors here.
Right. So there was a movie called Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, I know
and
exactly what you're talking about.
and everybody had a different name: Mr. Pink, Mr. Black, Mr. White, Mr. Red. So I make these guys, and I would go into Ybor City, which is a really kind of shitty area of Tampa. And back then you could buy houses in Ybor for $50,000, right? 40,000, 50,000. So but the median price in the area for sales was like 50 to 75,000. So I would go and I'd buy a house for 40 or 50,000, and then I would record the value of that or the sale of that house at 200. So it looks like I bought the house. In public records, it's like this guy bought this house 2 months ago for $200,000. But so Mr. Red would buy a house on Columbus, and then he'd buy another house on 124th Street, and then he'd buy another one on 101st Street, and then he'd buy one on, so he'd buy like 5 houses. All of them look like he paid around 200, 210, 205, 197. But the truth is these houses are worth 40 or 50 grand. And then I would have my other guy, I'd have David Silver buy a house for 220, 195. So then I'd have Lee Black would buy a house for 190 all in the same area. So what happens is when an appraiser comes out and looks at the houses, he's like, yeah, these are shitholes, but man, this thing's worth $205,000. you know, because he's basing it on the other comparable sales.
Yeah, the other sales. So you're essentially driving up the damn value in the whole area by doing that.
Yeah. Forbes actually said that after I'd been doing it about a year, Forbes said that Ybor City, the zip code in Ybor City is 33605. They said the 33605 zip code was one of the top 20 fastest growing zip codes in the nation.
Oh God, that's fucking crazy. Oh Jesus.
So
And you're still on probation from this first, while you're doing all this from the first one?
yeah, I'm on probation. I got my probation officer coming by the office. I'm cutting up fucking canceled checks and bank statements. And I got like 6 or 7 cell phones on the desk behind me. You know, and he doesn't have a clue. He walks in, hey, I'm like, hey, what's going on? I'm terrified every time I see him, waiting for him to arrest me or to say, hey, I'm violating you, or what's this? Never ask a question. Just say, hey, how's it going? Looking around. It's good. It's good. Stop by my house, you know, walk around. You know, it wouldn't take much, but you know, they're not looking for fraud. They're looking for like drug paraphernalia,
Yeah.
guns.
They're looking for shit immediately they can violate your probation and, send you up the road.
Yeah. So what happened was one time, and it's actually not one time, but it's several times. But the one time I think you're talking about, I've mentioned it a few times, is that I bought a house, and this guy's name was Alan. I think his name was Alan Duncan. I'd made a guy named Alan Duncan because I had several guys that were like, I had like a Joel Cologne, Alan Duncan. So I had Alan Duncan had bought a house, and he had, we pulled out like, I don't know, like $100,000 or something. And so I gave like my buddy Rudy, who's still a real estate agent and works in Tampa to this day. I gave Rudy like 40 grand or 30 grand, and I kept some money, and we gave some money to clean up the house and do or make whatever. So I gave him a little bit extra money. I said, look, you're gonna have to start making the payments, because I'm already paying like 30 fucking houses for 20 or 30 houses right now. So you're gonna have to make the payments on this thing. And he was like, okay, no problem. Like a month and a half later, I get a phone call from the mortgage broker, and she says, look, the account executive for South Star Bank just called me and said that they're investigating this loan. I went, why? And she said, they said that they never made a payment. There's never been a payment made. So I go to Rudy and I go, man, did you make that payment? He's like, oh man, is it due already? Like you were given like 30 or 40 grand, and all you had to do was make an $800 payment. You couldn't do that. He was an idiot. So we end up going to the office, and I call South Star, and I said, call them. And they're like, oh, and I asked for like the owner of the company, or like the bank president or something. And they said, yeah, listen, they said he's in a meeting right now. I said, no, he wants to talk to me. Tell him this is Alan Duncan. So they go and they tell him, and they immediately put me on speakerphone, and they said, well, we were actually just having a meeting about you, Mr. Duncan. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I said, yeah, I understand that the broker called me and said that said I'd never made a payment, and I apologize. I think I told him like the payment, I made it, but it came back in the mail, or I hadn't got the statement yet, but I have I have a cashier's check right now. I'm mailing it to you. And they said, no, it's too late for that. I said, we've already looked into it. Like your W-2s are fake. Your pay stubs fake. They just start naming off everything they've uncovered so far. They're like, your driver's license has never been issued. Your social security number is only issued like a year ago. We're still trying to figure that out. They were like, I was like, oh shit. So I was like, okay. Oh, they said, you don't even exist. And I was like, look, I hear you. Like, I hear where you're hear where you're going with this, but let's work something out. And they said, well, we don't need to work anything out. We're going to call the FBI. And I was like, yeah, you call the FBI, you'll never get your money back. And I'm assuming that your fiduciary responsibility is to the people that own the bank, like your stockholders, right? To your customers. You don't want to lose $100,000. Like they lent me like $140,000. It only cost $40 to fix up the house. So I was like, you're gonna lose $100,000. They said, no, when we sell the house, we'll get our money back. I said, no, you don't seem to understand. I said, do you have the appraisal in front of you? And they go, yeah. And they opened the appraisal, and I started explaining, a guy named James Red owns this comparable. Right? There's like 3 or 4 comparable sales. said, James Red owns this one. Lee Black owns this one. Michael White owns this one. So-and-so owns that. I said, Black, White, Red. You know, I said, do you understand? I said, let me explain what I've done. I just blatantly explain it, including the property they have. I said, your property, you're saying it's worth like $180,000. I said, the truth is, I said, I bought that thing for 30 grand or 40 grand. And I explained I paid extra doc stamps. I recorded the price higher. And they just were like, oh my God. I was like, yeah, you're going to lose 100,000. You try and take that house back. I said, or you can let me pay you back the whole amount and you don't call the FBI. And so they thought about it for a little bit and they came back and they said, you got the money? I said, absolutely, I got the money. And they said, you give us the money, we won't contact the FBI. So, and what's great is I got them a cashier's check. I mailed them the cashier's check. They never contacted the FBI.
I would almost be a little apprehensive of taking a check from you at that point.
It was a cashier's check.
Oh, well, yeah. Cashier's check's a little better.
Yeah. First of all, what am I going to do? I'm going to fuck them over twice. I want them to get their money back. It's in my best interest. And they know that's in my best interest.
Yeah. And I mean, you almost got a foolproof scheme to a certain extent, because even if they find out, like you said, they don't want them coming in and looking at other shit they've done. Cause I'm sure people have done, similar things like this before. Even other banks have probably fudged shit they shouldn't have supposed to, probably let go through. So that's just going to create more heat. So you've really got a great thing going here with this.
It seemed that way.
Well,
but I had a buddy who was doing a scam in the name of Michael White in Orlando. And so I had a girl that I was dating. She was running a scam in like Clearwater, I think. And she's running a scam and she goes in for a closing and the woman insisted that it wasn't her because she dyed her hair. Like dyed her hair blonde, and the picture she had was her with a brunette. She had black hair and it was curly, and her name was Rosita Perez. Well, she dyed her hair blonde, and just that, even though it was her picture on the driver's license. The woman just said, "No, this isn't you. I'm going to make some calls." Well, when she was making the phone call, she figured out what was going on, and she put a flag on the check, like so it's not going to go through. Well, she ends up giving that check to a guy that was running another scam, another buddy of mine who's running a scam in Orlando. He deposits the check. When he deposits the check, the owner or the bank manager calls them and says, "Can you come in back to the bank? We need to see you. We need to witness your signature on the check because you endorsed it, but we didn't witness the endorsement, and any endorsements over $100,000 have to be witnessed." Man, I've deposited checks for way more than that. They never needed to witness, no bank that. So it didn't sound right to me. And I told him not to go, but he ends up going anyway, and he gets arrested in the bank. Well, he immediately tells them, "I'm working with this guy, Matt Cox. He's on probation. He's running a huge scam. If I don't have to go to jail, like give me bond, let me out, and I'll help you get him." So he works with a task force. And think about it, because I had named almost all of these guys are named like blue, silver, green, red.
It's not that hard
It's not that hard to figure out. Like Mr. Red bought 5 houses and 6 months later, they're all in foreclosure.
Yeah.
That's not hard to figure out. Look, Mr. Black, Lee Black bought 6 houses within a 2-month period of time. And right now, all of them are going into foreclosure. Like, this isn't hard to realize it's a scam.
Yeah.
So they put a task force together and they come to arrest me, right? Like they're going to arrest me. The FBI is going to arrest me. And I have a friend who's a sheriff's deputy, and he contacts me, comes to my office one day and says, "Look, I used to date this chick on the Tampa Police Department. She was working on a task force that was investigating you. And I'd done like $500,000 to $1 million in bad loans in his name. So because of that, his name came up when they were investigating me. So she contacted him. She was like, "Look, don't talk to this guy anymore. He's going to get grabbed. You don't want to talk to him on the phone. You don't know what he's going to do. He may cooperate. He may try and get you. You're a fucking deputy. That would be a big feather in his cap if he could cooperate against you." So she's like, "Don't talk to him." And he's like, "Okay." So he immediately comes and tells me, "Bro, this is what's happening." I'm like, "Oh my God." And he goes, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm leaving. Like, I can't stay here. I'm already on federal probation.
Yeah.
Like, I can't stay here. So I leave. With the girl that I was dating this chick named Rebecca Hauk. God, what a nightmare she was. And I mean, I barely knew this chick. I've been dating this chick like a month or two. I don't even know her. Like, she's really, honestly, it's not like I'm still sleeping with this other chick. So what ends up happening is, what would happen is, like, let's say once a week or twice a week, she would come over, like on a Friday night, we'd go out, she'd spend the night. And then maybe she'd come over like once during the week. Like, that's the extent of our relationship. Like, it hasn't gotten to that girlfriend point, But she finds out I'm leaving and she begs to come with me. And so I let her come with me, which was just a massive, massive mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, she comes with me, but we don't have a lot of money at the time, because think about it, I only had like a day or two to get some money. I got like 80 grand in cash. We end up going to, we go to Atlanta and we rent a house from a guy named Michael Shanahan. And so it's in the name Michael Shanahan. So I make a fake ID that says I'm Michael Shanahan. So he rented it to her. I move in. I'm Michael Shanahan. He didn't know that. He didn't rent to me. He rented to her. So I then go and I satisfy all the loans on the house. He had 2 loans. He had a first and a second. He had like a credit line. So I satisfy those.
So essentially, at that point, for people that don't know what that means, if you satisfy them, the house is in effect paid off, right?
It appears to be paid off. Like, he still owes he still owes Bank of America, but keep in mind, I've also got a social security number in his name that isn't connected to anybody. So he's got a couple credit cards. It hasn't been 6 months.
Right.
Right. So I live in this house, and when I say I satisfied the mortgage, like you said, I created a document that says, like, if you've got this guy actually had 2 loans with Bank of America.
Right.
I always use Bank of America as an example, but he actually did have Bank of America mortgages. So I go and I get a satisfaction of mortgage from Bank of America. So it appears that Bank of America satisfied his loan. I then go downtown, I record it, but 2 of them. It's notarized. I get a notary stamp. That's not a big deal. So I notarize them. I record the mortgages, and now it appears and if anybody searches public records, it looks like there's no mortgage, or there were mortgages, but they were satisfied.
Right.
And so now I own this house worth about $200,000 in the name Michael Shanahan. I call up 3 hard money lenders. Hard money lender is just a guy that lends money on real estate. It's not like a bank. He just lends money on real estate. He puts a mortgage on it.
Yeah.
But he doesn't ask a lot of questions. And so he says, hey, this house is worth $200,000. I'll lend you $150,000. And I go, okay. So I call 3 of them. They all agree to lend $150,000 a piece. They don't know about each other.
Yeah. And you do this in quick succession.
You do it within a day or 2 of each other. I close them. I immediately go to, I close at different title companies. I get the checks. I cash the checks. I pull out the money. I leave. I've got $450,000.
Damn.
All this is all pretty much done in Michael Shanahan's name. Also, though, I have a driver's license in the name Scott Cugno. So at this point, I've figured out how to go to the local DMV of pretty much any state and get them to give me a driver's license, and I can steal your identity and then go, like, I don't know where you're at. What state are you in?
South Carolina.
Listen, I've had South Carolina.
Oh, I know. I was going to get to that. We'll get to there. You done some dirt up there. What, Columbia, right?
Columbia, yeah. So what I would do is, like in South Carolina, I would go and I at this point I started surveying homeless people. So, which sounds bad, but they weren't doing anything with their so, I start surveying them. I give them like $20 to take a survey to determine where the Salvation Army is going to be placing their next homeless facility. Because it's about people helping people. I'm just trying to help everybody. So I give them $20. They fill out a survey. And in the course of the survey, of course, I get enough information on them to steal their identity. So I then order a copy of their birth certificate. I register to vote in their name. in another state. So if they have a driver's license in South Carolina, I go to North Carolina,
Right.
or I go to Florida, or I go to Alabama.
Now,
Or
to tie in real quick, whenever you were getting this information, you would ask if they had a record, right? Because there was
yeah.
a funny ass story you said about a guy that did have some
Yeah.
arrest in Nevada.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So I'll explain that. So what happened is I have a driver's license named Scott Cugno. So I'm opening bank accounts in Scott Cugno's name, and I end up cashing a bunch of checks in Scott Cugno's name.
Mm-hmm.
So the one you're talking about is we end up going to North Carolina to Charlotte.
Charlotte, yeah.
And so I start running another scam in Charlotte where I go and I buy a couple houses. And one of the houses I borrow like close to $1 million on, right? Like I borrowed like 1.3 million in Charlotte. But the person I got his information that I used his information was a homeless guy that I'd met in Nevada, in Las Vegas. I surveyed several guys in Nevada, because anytime we'd go on vacation or something, drive through some states, you pull over and you stay the night and you go, and I'd survey a bunch of guys. So I'm surveying these homeless guys, and this one guy's name was Gary Sullivan. And I see him and I survey his name. I start surveying Gary, and I'm asking the questions. And in the middle of it, I say, one of the questions was, do you have any felonies? And he said, yeah, I do. He said, but it's not a felony. I've been arrested for prostitution a couple times, but it's not a felony here. And I went, oh, okay. And I went, prostitution? Because, in my mind at the time, prostitution was something that women got charged with, not men. Yeah. Like men get charged with solicitation.
Yeah.
And I went, prostitution like that? And he said, yeah. He said, I offered to blow an undercover cop for $20. And I was like, oh, you're a male prostitute. He's like, right. And then he goes, a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do, or something like. And I was like, okay, I hear you. So I take the information and I leave. I go from Nevada, I go to South Carolina. I get an ID in his name. Once I get the ID in his name, I go and I buy 2 houses. I convince the owners of the houses to owner finance those houses. So I give them like $25,000 down on one house. The other house I put down like $10,000 or $12,000. And then once they're recorded, I go downtown and I satisfy the loans on the house using a fake satisfaction. And any loans that they had on the house, I satisfy those loans too. So now I've got I own one house is worth like 100 or 230,000. The other one's worth like 110,000. And so I borrow like borrow $1.3 million on these 2 houses. Wow. So this one house is worth, I borrow almost $1 million on one house. And in the name Gary Sullivan. Now he doesn't have any credit, but he does have a house that's worth $230,000 that he owes nothing on. So they're willing to lend him like 190,000. And I go to multiple banks. So I've got like 5 or 6 banks that have lent him money, close them all like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They're closing them all within a couple of days of each other. Get the money, put the money in the bank. I've got multiple bank accounts. I have, how many? I don't know. I must have had 8 or 10 different bank accounts. Like some of them are in his name, some are in other people's names, some are in corporations' names. And I'm going in every couple of days and just pulling cash out of the bank. Well, one day I go in the bank and I walk in the bank and I ask for like 8 or 9 grand or something, right? From the cashier, from the teller. I'm standing there, bank's full of people. Well, what I didn't know was one of the lenders I had canceled a loan with had sent an abstractor to the public records, and they had found that there were 3 mortgages already on the property. I canceled this person, but they went out anyway. You're already on the list. They didn't know it was canceled. They went out, they checked, and they went, oh, this is weird. So they told the bank. Well, the bank said, this is fraud. They immediately called Wachovia, and Wachovia, all the banks called each other, and they decided Wachovia was going to run point, their head of their fraud department. So they contact the local police department, and they're waiting for me to come cash a check. They look at the bank account, of course, and they see that this guy's draining these accounts.
Yeah. You're just steady taking money out.
Right. So I walk in, I ask for like $8,000. I'm standing there waiting. Woman says, I got to go in the back and get clearance. No problem. They always did that. So she walks in the back, and I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, a sheriff's deputy reaches over and grabs my arm and yanks it behind my back. They grab the other one, they yank it, and they put cuffs on me. I turn around, there's these two huge sheriff's deputies. And they go, we need to talk to you. I said, okay. So they walk me in the back, put me in a room. You've been in the bank. They all have those glass windows. And so everybody's staring at me. I'm in handcuffs going, what the hell? I'm doing the whole golly gee whiz. Oh my God, what's going on? What's happening? Well, why am I in handcuffs? Well, did I do something? Golly gee whiz. So they go, listen, Mr. Sullivan, all we've been told was to detain you and wait for the detective to show up. And he's like, Mr. Sullivan. They kept saying, Mr. Sullivan, we don't know. And I'm like, Mr. Sullivan. So you don't know.
Yeah.
Because by this point, I'm like, I know I'm on the Secret Service's most wanted list. It's a problem. And so the detective shows up, and I remember thinking he was FBI till he says, no, I'm a detective with the Richland County Sheriff's Office. I was like, oh, okay. And he says, yeah, look, we got, huh?
He's like, I got this.
Yeah. I remember thinking, because I said to him, he said, we got a phone call from the Wachovia's head of security. And he said that you've got 3 mortgages on this piece of property. So I immediately knew, and I had like 6 mortgages, where I immediately knew they only know 3. So I was like, okay. And I said, is that illegal? And he goes, I don't know. And I remember thinking, I'm going to walk out of here. Like, I'm getting out of this. This guy doesn't know shit. So he says, look, we're going to call Wachovia. And I said, okay, cool. So he calls Wachovia, and he's on the phone with Wachovia. And Wachovia is saying, look, he's running a scam. It's called a shotgun scam. And he's running it. He closed like 3 mortgages before we could figure it out. And now he's pulling out the money. And he said, he looked at me, he said, man, he says you got 3 first mortgages. Have you ever read a mortgage document? They don't actually say what position they're in.
Yeah.
So it's just a lien on your house and how you're going to pay it back. So a first mortgage could be recorded in 4th position. So I said, that's funny, because I did all the closings. None of them said first mortgage on it. And then the guy goes, he starts yelling, well, okay, so well, then why is he pulling all the money out in cash? And I went, well, I mean, I work for a labor company. By this time, I've told him, look, I feel like I'm I feel like I'm under arrest. Can you uncuff me? Because I'm still thinking I might run. So I don't think I'm going to get very far, but I'm going to try. So they uncuff me. So, but I'm still in a back room. These 2 guys are standing by the front door. I'm not getting out.
Yeah.
So he says, why is he pulling all this money out in cash? And I pull out a business card that says Gary Sullivan, site manager, and that I work for a company called Labor on Demand Incorporated. And keep in mind, there's a bank, there's a website, and there's a phone number you can call. So I give it to the guy, and I said, man, I work for a labor company. I said, man, I mean, what happens is, I said, my company a lot of these guys are illegals, and they write checks to them, and they can't cash a check. They got to go to a check cashing place. So I'll cash their checks, because the check cashing place charges them like 8 or 10%, and I'll do it for free because I know that the check's good. I feel bad for these guys. And he goes, okay, that makes sense. And okay, cool. Then he says, well, why'd he close all the loans? Why'd he close all the loans? And I said, listen. All I know is that Wachovia's loan officer, I told him I needed to get about $400,000 or $500,000. I want to start buying houses and flipping houses. And the guy goes, yeah, that's right. You own another house here, don't you? I said, that's right. And now I know, oh my God, he knows I got another house. So I said, that's right. I'm fixing it up, and I'm using some of this money to do that. And I told her this, and she said, I can't get you that much. I can get you about 180,000. But I got a friend that can get you a second mortgage. So I went to her and she said, yeah, the most I can get you is like 150, maybe 180. But I got a friend that can get you a home equity line. So that's what I got. I said, that's what I wouldn't know how to do this. I don't know what these people did. I'm not a mortgage broker. I'm not a loan officer. I don't know. I'm not in finance. I work for a labor company. And yeah, he sits there and he goes, yeah, this doesn't make sense. He's telling the guy from Wachovia, he's screaming and hollering. Then the guy from Wachovia says, look at his ID. It's a fake ID, but it wasn't a fake ID. I'd had it issued by the South Carolina Department Department of Motor Vehicles. It was a real ID issued to Gary Sullivan. And he goes, it starts with 000. The guy looks at it and he goes, listen, man, it's a real ID. He said, our South Carolina IDs start with like 000.
Yeah.
And he said, it's a real ID. This is Gary Sullivan. I ran him through NCIC. It's him. And I thought, so the guy loses it. And he actually tells him, calm down. So I remember I leaned in and I looked at the cop. I go, oh, now I'm not Gary Sullivan. I go, come on, man, bro. What are we doing? What are we doing here? This guy says I've committed fraud. Clearly, I went to the institution. I'm who I say I am. These people are I don't know. I said, what makes more sense? That a guy who works for a labor company who has no experience in financing arranged to get 3 national banks to lend him $500,000? I said, or a bunch of loan officers got together and decided, how can we get this guy some money and make a big fat fee? I said, what sounds more reasonable? So the detective says to the guy from Wachovia, yeah, listen, I think you guys have a problem at the bank. I don't think this guy did anything wrong. I'm going to take him downtown. I'm going to let him fill out a police report and I'm going to let him go. So this guy goes nuts. But what are they going to do? So when I get up to leave, the detective says, Gary, I know you have a South Carolina ID. Do you have a driver's license? And I went, no. I said, I mean, I do, but it's in Nevada or Nevada, whatever you say it. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, that's right. He goes, you're from Las Vegas. And all the cops, like the 2 deputies, like they all look at each other and they kind of grin. And I realize he's pulled me through NCIC. So he thinks I've been arrested for prostitution. So he thinks I was once a male prostitute. So I was super embarrassed. And the guy goes, I'll check it out. He goes, I'll see if he's got a valid driver's license. He takes my ID, goes into the vehicle, his car. He comes back and I'm terrified. Like, I don't know if he's got to pull up a picture, but he comes back in and he says, yeah, he's got a valid driver's license in Nevada. Cause like, I had no idea whether this guy's even got a driver's license. He was homeless.
Yeah.
He goes, yeah, he's got a driver's license. And it says, he's okay. Everything checks out. And he goes, yeah, well, it says he's like 5'10". And I'm nowhere close to, I'm like 5'6". And so they all look at me and I go, well, fellows with a good pair of shoes. And so they all laugh. Ha, ha, ha. Follow us, Gary. So that I follow these guys to the police station. When I'm following them, the girl that I was dating, she's already called like 30 times. My phone is blowing up. So I pick up the phone and she starts screaming, oh my God, where have you been? She goes, I just checked the internet. She goes, you're #1 on the Secret Service's most wanted list. I said, listen, I got bigger problems. So I just got caught in a bank. I just talked my way out of the bank. I'm going to the police station, fill out a police report. I explained to her what happened. She's freaking out. She's like, get on the interstate. I'm like, get on the interstate? Like, what am I? I'm not a fucking NASCAR driver, okay? I'm driving a nice car, but I'm not outrunning the radio.
Yeah.
Or a helicopter. Anyway, what ends up happening is I go to the police station. I fill out a police report. The detective has me wait in like a hallway. For some reason, he couldn't let me stay in his cubicle. So I'm standing in the hallway and there's all these wanted posters on the wall. And my wanted poster, my Secret Service wanted poster, is hanging on the wall.
While you're standing there.
While I'm standing there. And I mean, I just like seen it, and he walks up behind me. He's like, "Hey, Gary." I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he says, "Okay, you ready to go?" I said, "Absolutely." Uh, he walks me downtown or downstairs, and he tells me not to leave the area. He said, he said by that point he talked to the district attorney, and he said, we've got some questions. Like we don't know. We're looking into it. I said, okay. I said, Brian, I'm not going anywhere. I own a couple of houses. I'll be here. He says, okay. So I get in my car and I go to 3 more banks and pull out more money. And then I jump on the interstate and I leave. And what's so funny about that is like the girl, when I was going in the police station, I had told her, listen, the worst that'll happen is they're going to arrest me as Gary Sullivan. You can get me out on bond. And she goes, I'm not getting you out on bond. I'm not going to hire an attorney. I'm not going to get, she had like $500,000-$600,000 in cash.
Ooh.
She goes, I'm not going to risk everything I've got. And she had all of the cash. But luckily I went in and I didn't get arrested. I go and I pull out some more money. I jump in a car. I drive to South Carolina. I hire some movers to load up my vehicle the next day, or load up a U-Haul truck or a Ryder truck. I forget which one. And I drive to Houston, Texas, because that's where the chick I was dating was. She'd already set up in Houston, Texas. And so I drive there. I left like $600,000 or $700,000 in the bank in Colombia. Or is it Colombia or Columbus?
Columbia.
In Colombia. I mean, I couldn't get it.
Yeah.
So
what happened to that? They just take it?
Yeah, they got it all.
Yeah.
So I go to South Carolina. I mean, I go to Texas. She and I get into a huge fight. She gives me like $500,000. No, she gives me like $100,000. Like we get into a huge argument and I'm like, I'm leaving. We need to split up the money. Like, I'm not staying with you anymore. You're crazy. First of all, she wasn't going to pick me up. Like, the only reason I need somebody that might need to bail me out or be there to answer calls. Or you just told me, you just proved to me that you're not going to be that person.
Yeah.
Like, you got no use to me for me at all anymore. So, and she was a total liability. Like, we'd get into arguments. She'd scream at the top of her lungs. She was bipolar. She wouldn't take her medication. Like I'd had her sent to a psychiatrist or psychologist, whichever one can prescribe medication. They gave her Zoloft. She took it for like a month or two. Just as she started becoming bearable to be around, she stopped taking it. I mean, she was a nightmare. Like, she's going to get me caught. And so I get like $100,000. I drive back to Charlotte to get my car. Like, I moved there to kind of stay there. But we get into an argument. I'm like, yeah, I'm not even staying in this city. I'm just going to go get my car. I'm going to find someplace else. So I drive back to Charlotte. I get my car. I actually return the Ryder truck. And I get my car. And I remember when I got my car, it was in the parking lot. It was right downtown. It was in like one of those, those big multi-story concrete right next to my the condo where I was renting. Or condo, was a post apartments. So I get that, and I remember thinking, I'm good. Like, nobody's looking for me. Like, I got my car. They would have been waiting near my car or staking out the car or something. Yeah. They weren't. And I thought, I'm good. And I knew that they because they had my tag on my car and my car was registered in Charlotte, like, I knew they were going to figure that out.
Yeah.
So I knew I couldn't stay there. So I drive across the street or kind of a block or so down to a Starbucks, and I'm getting a Starbucks coffee, and 2 people from the apartment complex are there getting coffee. And they're looking at me really weird. And I remember thinking, what's the problem? Like, what are these people's issue? And so I don't know what the problem is, but they're clearly upset. And I remember thinking it was over my rent. I remember thinking it was like the 4th or 5th or something, and my rent was due on the 1st or 2nd, but I had left. I wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, they're really taking this serious. Like, anyway, so what I do is I wait there, and the woman leaves Starbucks. Well, what happened, I found out later that the U.S. Marshals were actually interviewing them at the apartment complex, and they'd just been interviewed about me. So now they're like at Starbucks, and I walk in, they're like, oh my God, that's him. So she goes to get him. She tells the U.S. Marshals, I get my order. I walk outside, get in my car, start my car, not realizing what's going on. The guy walks out and he's staring at me. He's just standing there like with a plate of coffee, those styrofoam tray things.
Yeah.
And he's standing there staring at me. And I remember thinking like, what is this dude's problem? Like my rent's a couple days late. Like, I mean, I've owned a bunch of rental properties. Like I've never been this irritated. He's stalking me. But I want to get out of Charlotte. I mean, I want to get out of Charlotte like as soon as possible. So start my car. And I remember as soon as I kind of started my car, he starts screaming. He drops the tray. Like, it sounds dramatic, right? But like he starts yelling and he like drops the tray of Starbucks coffee. Like he's trying to grab it and everything. And he's screaming, he's right here. He's right here. And I look in the rearview mirror and there's two guys running down the sidewalk towards my car. And I just punch it and I take off right down the road. It sounds real dramatic, but I mean, let's say they were probably 150 feet away.
Yeah.
But still, like I take off, I drive right down, take off. I drive about a mile away and I'm driving by a place they called the Dog Pound, which was a like a homeless facility.
Yeah.
And as I'm shooting out of the city, I drive by and there's a bunch of guys, white guys, standing together outside the Dog Pound. So I whip the car around, pull in, stop, jump out of the car with my survey thing, survey those three guys because I don't have any information. Survey those three guys, jump back in my car, take off again, drive to Nashville, Tennessee. I rent an apartment from this older guy. I'm like driving through Green Hills, which is a really nice area in Nashville. I'm driving through Green Hills and I see this old guy putting a sign in the front yard of what ends up being like a duplex, like a 2 townhouses duplex. I pull over and I say, hey man, what's going on? He says, hey, I said, you looking for someplace to rent? I said, I am. I look at the place, I come back and I said, yeah, it's perfect. And I said, what do you need from me? And remember, he looked at me. Now, by this point, I've been there like 1 day. I've already got a cell phone and ordered business cards with the cell phone number on it. With my name, the name of one of the guys, the homeless guys.
Yeah.
His name was Joseph Marion Carter Jr. So I put Joseph Carter. And I told him, I said, my name's Carter and, I'd like to rent the place. And he looked at me up and down. He looked at my car, which was probably a $50,000, $60,000 sports car. And I said, do you need to pull my credit? And he goes, you look like a nice young man. He said, just give me your first month and your deposit. I said, absolutely. Do you take cash? So I gave him cash. He gave me the keys. And I remember thinking that I was going to like Nashville. They were very trusting. I rented that place. And within a week, I had a new driver's license, a new car, a new social security number. And I'd already ordered 3 new secure credit cards. I managed to get a car loan. I then drove that car that I knew the police were looking for all the way back to Nashville, left in long-term parking, took a plane, flew back. Drove it all the way back to Charlotte, took a plane back to Nashville and started the whole process over again. I bought a bunch of houses, started recording the value of those houses of 200, 210, 230,000, borrowed $3.5 million from banks in Nashville. Well, keep in mind in Ybor City in Tampa, I'd borrowed 11.5 million.
Jesus.
So I borrowed 3.5 million, met this chick in Nashville. And she found out who I was. She
found out or you told her?
No, she found out. Like, I mean, literally, like I even had the conversation. Like she knew I was on the run.
Right.
But she actually just wasn't positive what was going on. And I explained to her, like, if you ever figure out who I'm at, or I see you even trying, I'll just pack my shit and leave.
Yeah.
So like this relationship is not worth me going to prison. So one day I had to mail something. I emailed something to my corporate lawyer, right? Because I'm opening corporations. I've opened a development company. I'm doing a lot of different things. I'm buying houses. I'm renovating houses. I'm also driving the price up in this area. So I'm buying the houses in the area. Like, why wouldn't you buy a bunch of houses? You keep some of the houses, you drive the prices up of other ones. All my property's worth more.
Yeah.
So I'm borrowing money against property. Some I'm keeping, some I'm not. I'm also developing the area. I'm about to start build. I'm building, actually, I'm about to. I'm building brand new houses. And she ends up going on my computer because the lawyer hadn't received, she said she didn't receive my email. So when she goes onto Word, she finds a letter that I'd written my parents like 3 years earlier when I left Tampa. And she sees the name, George and Margaret Cox. She sees my name, Matthew. She looks up Matthew Cox, Secret Service's most wanted list, fraud. There's got to be 50 or 60 articles on me. I've been in all these magazines. I mean, I've been in, Dateline, NBC News was about to do a fucking report. So she freaks out a little bit, really she doesn't say anything initially. Like, she says nothing, but I figure out that she knows.
Yeah.
And so she starts crying, please don't leave, please don't leave. I stay there. Eventually she ends up telling a friend of hers. And I mean, the short version is her friend calls the Secret Service and turns me in for a $10,000 reward.
Aren't y'all like out of the country or something at that point? Y'all on vacation or something like that? Or
No, I'd been on vacation. Like, we had just come back. Keep in mind, I've had 24 passports. So, I mean, I got arrested about a month after we had just come back from like a 2-week, we'd gone on like a 10-day cruise. We spent 3 days in Venice. We went to Greece. We went to Croatia. We went, obviously we went to Italy.
right.
And we went on this cruise, went to all the Greek Isles. And so I just come back from there. Listen, I've been on different passports. I mean, I've been to Mexico. I've been to Bermuda. I've been to Jamaica. I've been all over the place. And none of them were my passports.
Right. Other people's. So I
Right.
mean, but that is like such beneficial to someone like you, and what you were doing is being able to go to another town, having the wherewithal to be able to assume some of these homeless people's identities, open up these line of credits, get houses, get cars, because the average person just on the run, probably doesn't have that capability, and they're just going to have to eventually just hide out until they get caught, probably sleep wherever. But you have all these skills. It makes it very hard for them to track you down. And if that girl hadn't told one of her friends that ultimately, I think she worked out a deal with the FBI or she got some reward money for turning you in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd have gotten caught.
I think when Dateline, the problem was I was very concerned about Dateline. Had Dateline, done the interview or done the report on me, which they did. They did 2 1-hour specials. It was on American Greed. Did a 1-hour
I've
thing.
seen the American Greed.
Right. So, I mean, like what, like somebody's going to recognize. The problem is keep in mind, let's say while that's coming, let's say that those episodes come out and I move. So I'm constantly on the move while this is happening. Like, that's possible. Nobody really recognized me. Typically what happens is let's say I go, but here's the problem. 6 months later, a year later, I go ahead and I say, I'm going to set up camp here in Colorado. And I get a place, I get a routine. I go to the gym every day. I go to Starbucks. I start buying houses, fixing them up, doing whatever. Even if I lay low. Then one day, somebody at the gym watches American Greed.
Yeah.
A rerun. It's a rerun now. Because
Yeah.
these things run over, and he looks up and he goes, holy shit, that's that guy at the gym. I see this guy like every day. Calls the Secret Service or the FBI. FBI go the next day. They're working out. They look over. The guy's like, that's him. They look. They go, holy shit. They follow me for 2 days. They arrest me. That's it. It's over. And that's the problem. So, the problem is I stole too much money wasn't even a lot of money. It was just in such a brazen way.
Yeah.
And think about all the times I got caught and got out of it. Caught and got. I mean, I just went over a few of them with you.
Yeah.
Like I would get caught, pay them back, get caught, pay them back, get caught, run away. So because of that, all of those were newspaper articles. And every time there's a newspaper article and there's these little, they're looking for this guy. They're looking, I'm on the news. So it puts pressure on them to find me. Had I stolen money and done it in a way that wasn't, so brazen, I never would have probably ended up on Dateline. And I probably could have just kind of blended into, and that's what I was trying to do, was just kind of reintegrate myself into society.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen.
So what did they eventually charge you with? I know initially they were trying to throw it at you hard.
I mean, yeah, they did. Right? I got like that. The only thing they ever dropped was, I think, like money laundering. I got bank fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, financial institution fraud, conspiracy to commit financial institution fraud, government document fraud, or social security fraud, passport fraud, use of a fraudulent passport. I got wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I got aggravated identity theft. I've got
fraud you didn't have on the document.
No, the only thing I think they dropped was money laundering. Like that was it.
Wow.
So, yeah, I got 26 years.
26 years.
I got sentenced to 26 years.
Wow. And how much time did you have to do?
I did 13 years.
13 years.
Because when they caught me, I cooperated, and one of the cooperated I just told them everybody that was involved in throughout the entire thing. But those people had already cooperated.
Yeah.
And some of them have already gone to prison by this point. So that cooperation didn't lead to any arrests. And this is also in the middle. This is the beginning of the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these crimes are 4 and 5 years old. Well, you've got crimes that are happening right now to investigate. Do we want to investigate something that's 5 years old?
Yeah.
So a lot of those people didn't get indicted. The ones that did get indicted or were in trouble already were in prison. So that didn't help. So that cooperation, snitching those people out didn't help me.
Yeah.
So, but I was interviewed I was asked to be interviewed by Dateline and American Greed. So I was interviewed by Dateline and American Greed, and I was told by my prosecutor they would consider that substantial assistance. So what ends up happening is while I'm incarcerated, the short version is they don't want to give me anything for that.
Wow.
They're like, oh, we told you that we would, and we'd consider it, and we considered it, but we're not going to give you anything for it. So fuck you. So I end up meeting this guy in prison named Frank Amadeo. He's a disbarred attorney, and he files paperwork and he gets the government to give me 7 years off my sentence.
Wow, that's good.
Just as that happens, and I just came back from getting 7 years, I now have like 8 or 9 more years to go on my sentence. So there was this guy who was a con man named Ron Wilson. He'd stolen $57 million from churches and pension funds. So yeah, and this is a problem with him is that, I liked him. He was a nice guy. Like, he was very funny. He was gruff. He was kind of an asshole, but I like guys that are kind of gruff assholes. So,
yeah.
Arrogant, just but I liked him. He was very straightforward. He was cooperating against people in his case. Keep in mind, I just was picked up on a bus, went to Atlanta, came back. Like, everybody knows I cooperated.
Yeah.
I'm not fucking hiding it.
Yeah.
I'm not advertising.
Right.
So anyway, Wilson is constantly talking to me about his case. And he's like, they're not going to give me anything for my cooperation. They're going to try and fuck me over. I was like, why? And he goes, well, because they think I've hidden a lot of that money. They think I hid some money. I'm like, well, you didn't hide any money, and they'd have to prove that to withhold the cooperation. So don't worry about it. Your guys are gonna, you're gonna get, these guys are gonna be indicted. They're going to trial. You're gonna testify against them. You're good. So one day we're walking around and he keeps saying they're not going to give me anything. And I go, why do you keep saying that? I said, you didn't hide any money, so don't worry about it. And he goes, can I be honest with you? Can I trust you? And I remember I said, no, I said, probably not. And he just kind of laughs and he goes, I did hide some money. I gave some money to my soon-to-be ex-wife and my brother. He said, but I'm afraid that my ex-wife's going to tell because she found out that I was having an affair and we're getting a divorce. So it wasn't his ex-wife at the time. They were getting divorced. So he's like, so I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, don't worry about it. She probably won't say anything. He goes, I don't know. I think she might say something. So a couple days, maybe not even a couple days, like probably a month later, I was talking to my lawyer on the phone. I didn't say anything because I didn't think the government was going to give me anything for that. Like, well, I'm going to say there's some money buried. And he told me there was only like 100,000, 150,000. Like, it's not a lot of money. And I thought they're not going to give me anything for that. And they're probably not going to indict anybody for that, the recovery of those funds. They're not going to re-indict anybody. Yeah. He's already got 19 and a half years. They're not giving him any more time. So I just didn't say anything. Just happened to be talking to my lawyer about a month later. I was asking her to order my transcripts for my resentencing. And she said, is everything okay? I went, yeah. She goes, anything happening in there? And I went, like what? And she goes, I don't know, anything going on? Like this chick never wanted to do nothing on my case. Like the fact that she was even answering, even asking me was weird. And I went, there's something weird did happen the other day. And I tell her about Wilson. And she goes, well, let me look into it. I said, all right. Like, I don't think she's going to look into it. I don't think she's doing nothing. I can't even get her to order my damn transcripts. So sure enough, what happens is a couple days later, a CO comes to me and he says, hey, Cox. And I go, yeah, you got to go to SIS. SIS is like the internal security for the prison. And I go, okay. So I go to SIS and they're like, hey, here, talk to this guy. I'm like, what? And I pick up the phone and it's a Secret Service agent who's investigating Ron Wilson. And he says, I understand you know where money's being hidden for Ron Wilson. I went, well, first of all, get me a letter saying that I'll get something for it and I'll tell you. And I said, but I don't think you're going to get any arrests or anything. It's just a little bit of money. And he goes, okay. So he gets me this letter and I tell him, yeah, Wilson said his wife's got some money and his brother's got a little bit of money. So they call both of them in for questioning. And his wife brings in like $350,000 in cash and gold and silver. And his brother comes in and brings $150,000 in cash. It ends up being $500,000. Oh. They reindict Wilson. They indict his brother and his ex-wife. His wife gets a year probation or something like that. And I think his brother they both get like a year probation and they have to do like 100 hours of community service or something. And that's it. And then Wilson gets 6 more months added on to his sentence. So I go to the government, like, that's nothing. Like, they're not going to give me nothing for that. So I go to the government. Hey, you're supposed to cut my sentence. I even had a letter where they said they were going to cut my sentence. And they said, no, we don't know anything about this. We don't know what you're talking about. So Frank Amadeo refiles a 2255, another motion for me and convinces them to give me 5 more years off my sentence. Well, this is a long process. So by the time this happens, as soon as it happens, I've got like a year left.
Yeah.
So they put me in for halfway house and I'm out the door within about a year. Wow. That I walked out of prison. That was 3 years ago.
Jesus. So you've been out for 3 years?
3 years. July of 2019.
Now that I did not know. I didn't realize that time was so close because we're closing in on time here and I want to get to, you've started your own podcast and dude, you've got a lot of followers. I mean, you get a lot of, you've blown up pretty quick, only been out that short amount of time. I didn't realize that.
Everybody says that. I feel like I don't have a lot of followers. I started about, I started about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And what happened was I had just walked out of the halfway house. And and I did Concrete, Danny
Yeah.
Jones's podcast, Concrete. It's in Sarasota here. And I did that. And I only did it because he was answering all my questions. I was thinking about doing a podcast, like a true crime podcast or something.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing his, and it got like 1 million. In like 2 months, it got like 1 million views. And I think it's got almost 2 million now.
Yeah, it's up there.
Well, I missed that opportunity. Like, if you were going to tell your story and be on some podcast, you were going to get 2 million. If you had a YouTube channel, your YouTube channel would blow up.
Yeah.
I didn't have a YouTube channel. I didn't start my YouTube channel for another year.
So there was nowhere for people to go and follow and find you on the heat of that blow up episode.
Exactly. So although my channel, I've got like 53,000 subscribers right now. Had I struck while the iron was hot, I'd probably have 200,000 or 300,000. Like I really missed the opportunity. Not that I'm not saying my YouTube channel's not doing well. It's doing well. I mean, I'm happy with it. Listen, bro, I genuinely, hand to God, when I walked out of prison, thought I was going to be working at McDonald's.
Yeah.
I mean, so, the idea that I'm making a living on YouTube, and I paint, and the books, I wrote a bunch of books, true crime books, when I was in prison in 13 years, bro. Like, I wrote a bunch of my fellow inmates' true crime stories. I wrote my memoir. The fact that,
didn't you write Boziak's too?
of course,
Yeah.
bro, Boziak's is going to be turned into like a Netflix fucking series or something.
Yeah, his story's crazy. I've spoke with him a couple of times. I'm trying to get him on the show because his story is another one that's just out of this world. But I mean, you've got a great story. I don't know how. Like, have you been knocked on the door by Hollywood for anything from your movie rights? I mean,
I have, but you have to, look, it's hit or miss, and I've signed shopping agreements, and, and of course they expire, and then,
yeah,
or they want you to sign something that's super permanent. It's like, yeah, but you don't have a deal. Like,
yeah,
and they never want to give you really anything. Like, when I was in prison, like, I optioned the life rights of guys' stories that I had written. I've optioned some of my stories. I've optioned like 4 of my true crime stories.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really have focused on my personal story. So I'm working on trying to get a documentary made. I mean, I've been offered documentaries. So I'm working with a production company to do a documentary on my story.
Right.
And, hopefully that does well. And hopefully that ends up on Amazon or Hulu or something. And if that works out, then I think that will give me, you can be YouTube famous and nobody knows who you are.
Yeah.
But if I'm on Netflix or I'm on something like that, then there's a better chance that my story gets turned into a series or gets to turn into a movie. You don't get any money for documentaries, but at least it'd be an hour and a half, good, solid, good version of my story.
No, I agree with that 100%. So tell our audience members like where they can go to find you, find your YouTubes, and did you start at a second channel, correct? Into the Darkness?
Yeah, I just started like this, like, it's hard to get people to come on your show.
Oh yeah.
So if physically I can get the individual to come here to my studio, then I have another studio set up where after I interview them, I then kind of sit them on a stool and do like a soft white underbelly type thing where it's just them. It has nothing to do with me. And I think I've got like 20 or 25 interviews on there already. And it's just, some of these guys talk for 2.5 hours. Some talk for 45 minutes. And it's just them telling their story. You know what soft white underbelly is?
Yeah, yeah. It's
right.
That black and white tone. Yeah, that's
right.
Really cool. And I like how you done yours. We've interviewed a number of the same people. We've interviewed Cass Blaze, Tim McBride, who have actually, I'm interviewing him in a little bit again with another big pot smuggler.
Jeff Turner?
Yep, Jeff Turner. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you see the shorts? I did a bunch of shorts with him.
Yeah, yeah. Those are very awesome. And I think he just did Vlad. I think he went to Nashville and done Vlad about a month ago. So, and that's cool too, to like be able to say that you were able to kind of interview some of these guys before they went to those big, platforms like that. And some of these guys have gotten, option deals for movies. I mean, that's a long process. I know guys that's got their life rights option 15 times. You know, just because you get your life rights option, at the end of the day, it's good for the person. You get some money, and if they don't do anything with it, then that money's yours, and you can sell them again. but it really doesn't mean shit until the ball gets rolling
Listen,
on that.
Hollywood is optioning 2,000 people's life rights every single year, and
Yeah.
4 get made.
Yeah.
You know, so the idea that like that's like me sitting here thinking that all my stuff's going to be turned into. Listen, man, it's unlikely.
Yeah.
You know, but it may happen, and if it does happen, keep in mind too, the moment they option one of your stories and it does well, now everything you made or everything you've written start the option. It's like they were amazing before, but now you've got credibility.
Yeah. I think of everybody that I've interviewed, if one person, and I haven't actually interviewed him yet, we've talked and we've met and we're trying to set up something where we can do it in a studio. But if anybody's story needs to get into a movie, it's Michael Dowd.
Oh,
Like that, I think that could probably be a damn series or something on Netflix. You could, because I don't even know if you can cram pack everything they did into an hour and a half or 2 hour long movie, but
yeah.
that's got to be done soon. I hope that gets made by somebody here.
I had him on Inside the Darkness also.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just did Soft White Underbelly too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I met him a couple weeks ago in New York at a recording they had up there at a studio, and I mean he's another one like you, man. I mean they were just natural storytellers.
Yeah, he's good. He's got a great story too. You know, and he's very aware of himself too. He's not trying to hide, you know.
Right. He doesn't sugarcoat shit. I mean,
No,
it is
he's not just trying to justify anything. He's like, look, this is what I did. This is, you know, and it was wrong. This is, but you know, this is it. You either want to hear the truth or not. Like, I'm not going to like you said, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is what happened.
So real quick, just tell everybody where it shows to go search for, to follow for you on YouTube.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My channel is Matt Cox Inside True Crime. And then the other one's Inside the Darkness. And yeah, you know, like if you're interested, I've got several of my books are on Amazon. It's, you know, Shark in the Housing Pool. And you know, all my books they're all connected. So if you find Shark in the Housing Pool, Matt Cox or whatever, the book is there. And they're also all I think almost all of them have audibles.
Okay. All right. So
yeah,
your paintings, where can they go to check out your paintings? You got some cool ass artwork too.
Yeah. Instagram is I'm on Instagram for Cox Pop Art.
Okay. Cox Pop Art. All right. Yeah. So they can check. We'll link all those up into our show notes here when we put this out on YouTube. We'll put links to your books and both of your podcasts and all that good stuff for everybody to go, you know, check you out. Matt, I really appreciate you coming on the show, man. And folks, believe me, we've only scratched the surface. This was an hour and a half, and there is so much more to, you know, to get into. He's got stories for days, and hopefully at some point maybe we can get together in a studio and do a longer version. But I just really want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show, my friend.
Sure, no problem. I appreciate it.
All right, buddy. Well, folks, I am Hollywood Wade. That was Matt Cox, and unfortunately we are out of time, so tune in next week for an all new episode of Crime and Entertainment. Matt, we appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.